I'm going to play the first verse and then we'll begin.
स एवायं मया तेद्य योगः प्रोक्तः पुरातनः भक्तोऽसि मे सखा चेति रहस्यं ह्येतदुत्तमम्.
It is the same ancient path that I have now revealed to thee, since thou art my devotee and my friend. It is the supreme secret. Please remember the words, the same ancient path. I'll come back to that in a few slides. But before that, since we are returning from a break, it's time to play some games. If you're familiar with Waldo, and folks on the video line, you can't play, so you can just watch me point to Waldo like this. This is a game in the British Islands. It's called Wally. In the United States, these books are called Waldo. And the objective of the game is to find Waldo. And so we're going to play this game together. We're going to all find Waldo. This is Waldo. Waldo wears these clothes. He has glasses, striped shirt, white and red, blue pants, has a stick in hand. Very peculiar looking gentleman. And to help us find Waldo, and just to get us started, I asked my old friend Bo to help me. So the first time along, hopefully with my friend's help, you won't have any trouble finding Waldo. Ready? My friend Bo is known to us by a different name. Where's Waldo?
Oh my goodness.
Here.
Here.
No. This, of course, is Waldo. This is Waldo.
Where are you showing?
Wherever Bo is showing. Barack Obama showing this fellow. That's Waldo.
Okay.
Hard to see, but you can play along. All right, let's do it on our own now. In this chart, spend your time, look for Waldo. He's wearing travel clothes and he's going around. So you might want to look around and look for, if you want to step up, you can do it. Look for Waldo. Round glasses, thick frame, blue and white striped shirt, red pants. Oh, sorry, blue pants, white and red striped shirt, stick in hand. Do you see him?
Yeah.
Okay, where?
It's in front of the yellow car.
Yellow car here?
Yeah.
Where's Waldo here? There's no Waldo here.
Next to the
This guy?
the Red Rider.
This?
There is somebody with a stick there.
All the way at the far back. Right.
Here?
No, further.
Yeah.
All the way.
As is a thief.
No. Gaurav, next to the rider on the bike, right? There is somebody with a stick.
Where is the red guy?
Stick is the differentiator.
Left at the bottom.
Because nobody else would be holding a
Wait.
stick.
I hear another. Who said left at the bottom? Alright. Here? No, that's a guy feeding pigeons.
Down.
Oh, here.
This one.
Good job. We found Waldo. Well done. We found Waldo. Good teamwork. But let's find Waldo again. This one's trickier.
Same guy, right?
Same fella. Same glasses,
I
same
think the
red.
differentiator is just the stick.
Well, I don't know. Some other people might be carrying sticks.
That's his trademark. He's got on a stick.
Yeah.
Just
Not
look
everyone would
look
walk
for
around
the
with a
stick.
stick, right?
That's it. Look for the blue pants. Blue pants stick.
Well, try harder. I don't know where the heck Waldo is in this one either. I found him once.
Too jumbled, too much.
Too small a screen.
Yeah.
Two smaller screens. Okay. Well, Waldo's somewhere here in this one. We found Waldo 3 times. Well done. You get the idea. Waldo is hidden somewhere in the broader pattern. Once you know how to find Waldo, with a little effort and a little, computer algorithm, you can find Waldo anywhere. So let's move on to another Waldo that I'm interested in talking to you about. And it's the same pattern. You're going to see patterns, and in that pattern you will see Waldo. And once you've seen Waldo once, you know how to find Waldo elsewhere in the same pattern. Ready? This Waldo is actually his middle name. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Anyone heard of him? Famous American transcendentalist, 1800s. He kind of looked like Waldo, same hairdo for sure, but no stick, unfortunately. Famous guy. He is a philosopher, a speaker, and a transcendentist. Transcendent meaning that the truth is transcending outside. It's at a layer different from the one we live in. And that philosophy, he is one of the sort of original founders of that. And Emerson is very famous as a philosopher and as a speaker and as a writer. And Ralph Waldo Emerson spent a lot of time with the Upanishads and the Gita. And that time he spent with the Upanishads and the Gita influenced him and encouraged him to think beyond the narrow sort of confines of the then Christian tradition prevalent in the United States. And being an influential author, influential speaker, and an influential sort of gentleman all around, he had a lot to say, and people had a lot to hear from him. And once you've seen this Waldo, and I'll show you a few of Waldo's works, you're going to see his footprint everywhere else. And we'll try to explore some of those footprints. All right, ready for more Waldo? All right. One of his famous quotes is, the first thing we have to say, this is New England, Boston side, and he's speaking to his peers who are now filled with this effervescent joy that they're discovering something new, this new breaking cool thing. Sort of like Silicon Valley, where we think we're reinventing the world, and the world will no longer be the same because my phone now has no bezels or whatever, right? So around the same time, philosophy in the United States, a lot of smart people were thinking we're reinventing the way the world is and the way we're seeing the world. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, no, that's not really the case, because it is truly the case that the first thing that we're saying is that the new views here in New England at the present time, they're not new views. They are the very oldest of thoughts cast into the mold of these new times. Which is exactly this. There's an old ancient truth that I am revealing unto you, my friend Arjun. The same form, the same sentiment, Emerson translates to his peers and says, no, my friends, the work that we're doing, it appears new to us because it's new to us, but it is not new to the world. Some of these are the oldest thoughts. And the reason he knew these were oldest thoughts is because he was reading the Upanishads and the Gita at the time. He was very strongly influenced by the Upanishads and the Gita. And an interesting thing about him, two interesting things that I will tell you right now at this slide is, number one, if you know the TED Talks, you could think of him as the grandfather of TED Talks. Because you see, he made a living out of speaking, public speaking. Not only did he make a living out of his own public speaking, which is great, he made a living out of everybody else's public speaking. Because it turns out, good speakers need managers and producers. And he said, okay, you know what, I know how to, he knew how to do things in the world. So he said, I'll tell you, I'll run these talking tours for you. So he made a lot of money organizing these speaking tours. And people were very interested in new ideas at the time. And so his friends would get an audience and he would make money from making his friends available to those audiences. And with the money he made, he bought some land next to a lake. I'll let that rest. He also wrote a book called Self-Reliance, which you might think of as the most American of ideas. Self-reliance. I want to stand up for myself, be my own man. But what does he say? He is urging his readers to follow their individual will instead of conforming to social expectations. Do what your heart says is right. He's follow your own voice instead of an intermediary. Don't do what the church says you should do. Do what your heart says you should do. Learn to listen to your heart by sitting in solitary confinement or somewhere quiet. Listen to nature. Listen to your nature and the nature outside and hear what it speaks to you. He urges his readers to be honest in their relationships with others. Relationships with others in Sanskrit is dharma, is the universal sort of background of relationships. And so all this book is very influential. Self-Reliance is very influential, and it gets translated into other countries, and other people read it, and they become influential as well. And so this Waldo is seen all around. Where all have you seen this Waldo? He had a friend, a younger friend called Thoreau, whom you might know, Henry David Thoreau. Very famous philosopher, poet, very influential. He did a few interesting things. Remember I told you about how our friend Mr. Emerson made money and bought a land next to a lake? On that lake, this is called the Walden Pond, and on that lake, his friend, young friend, Mr. Thoreau said, hey, I want to be self-reliant and live in nature. Do you mind if I live on your property? He said, sure. So for 2 years, 2 months and 2 days, I think that's the count, Thoreau lives on Walden Pond. And he writes about it. Walden is one of the most influential books that most people here would have heard of. It's certainly taught here. And it's a book about the reflection, his reflection, sitting by Walden Pond on land that Emerson bought with his TED Talk money, and thinking about man's connection to nature and how nature works. Carrying with him, he's sitting in solitary confinement, he's sitting by himself, though not quite, because he would often go home to his sister or his mother to have dinner. They were about a mile down the road, wasn't too far, or to get his laundry done, as is with my son, I'm sure your son as well. Because of course you got to go to mom for laundry. So, but he's sitting by himself and he carries with him a few books. And what book does he carry? He says the waters of the Walden Pond are like the waters of the Ganges, the river Ganga. And he's reading the Bhagavad Gita with him. And so he reflects on it and he makes it his own. And through the work he writes, two famous works that I'm going to talk about. One, Walden itself, very famous. The other is a word you would not have heard of in this context. It's about civil disobedience. He writes a book about civil disobedience. He writes a series of essays about civil disobedience. Why is those words familiar? Because that Waldo ricochets around the world. So this is Thoreau's impact on world history. In his life, his work did not have that much impact, as much as rippling through time. You look at events unrelated to the Walden Pond. The national park system, which you know because, again, he was sitting at Walden Pond and talking about man's connection to nature, that led to the formation of the national parks. The British Labour movement, the creation of India, because obviously the civil disobedience movement, you and I know, being Indians, is what Gandhi followed. How did Gandhiji come into it? He was reading Tolstoy. How did Tolstoy get into it? He was reading Thoreau. How did Thoreau get into it? He was reading the Gita, and he was reading Emerson. Once you see Waldo, you can find Waldo everywhere. And so if you look at Martin Luther King, you can look at hippie movement, you look at the 1%, 99% movement that happened a few years ago. Everything is influenced by a man sitting by the pond, reading the Gita, and reflecting on nature. And so the outsized impact that Thoreau and Emerson have had on modern politics and modern political thinking cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated. And so, once you see Waldo, you will see, in Germany, Nietzsche was reading Emerson. Tolstoy was reading Emerson and Thoreau. Thoreau was reading everyone. Gandhi, MLK, TED Talks. A lot of these ideas come back from our friend over here, wearing thick glasses and a stick, wearing striped shirts. And that's the outsized impact that modern politics and modern political thought and the nature of movements has been influenced by the reading and understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. And with that, we move to the next thing.
Are you going to talk about the civil disobedience, the connection with Gita?
Sorry.
I don't see the connection, that's why I'm just...
So the connection, so there is connection. I'm going to skip that right now. But the point was, both these authors were deeply influenced. Their own person, and I'll talk about that in the next segment, which is the scientist. Very deeply influenced by the Gita. So what these people have done is they've read it deeply, taken it to heart, and let their work speak the song of the Gita in their action and their words. And that we're going to see in the next one in a more stark and subtle fashion. So we covered one topic, which is Waldo. We're going to move to another topic, which is somewhat aligned,